Hey guys, how's it going? I'm David Harrington, one of the Corel Painter Masters for 2016. Today I'm going to be going over some drawing techniques and drawing brushes that I use in Corel Painter, and kind of some general drawing philosophy that I use every day to do my artwork. And hopefully some of these techniques will be useful for you guys, and maybe you can take them and elaborate on them and see if they work for you or if they don't work for you. So the first thing I kind of want to cover are the basic brushes that I use for drawing. The first brush that I use a lot is this fine point pen. You can see the fine point up here. It's a really useful brush. It's very synthetic, kind of like very textureless. It's very smooth. You can use it for really dynamic shapes, really quick, easy strokes. And if you are new to Painter, if you hold Control and Alt, you can resize your brush on the fly dynamically so that you can make very small technical strokes and then immediately make very large broad strokes. So when I'm working, I actually use that quite a bit, where I'm changing the size of my brush constantly. So if you hold Control and Alt, that'll allow you to do that, and you'll see that big green sphere show up. It shows you which size your brush is going to turn into. So that's pretty cool. So that's the basic fine point pen tool. That brush is really good for drawing. It's actually really good for painting as well. But I'll use that brush for probably, I want to say, 80 or 90% of my line art. So all this stuff up here is done mostly with the pen tool, a little bit with the soft acrylic brush. And then I'll use that kind of in combination with another brush that I use a lot, which is called the Grainy Water blender. Now this is one of the blender brushes you can see up here under the blender category. I like Grainy Water because it really picks up a lot of the paper texture that's underneath, or that you have selected. It's really good for blending out areas of hatching into making it just a flat tone. It's really good for kind of working back and forth with the pen tool, so that I can kind of move a line around, move some tone around. And that blender brush can really soften things out and make it a little bit more tonal overall, which is pretty cool. One thing that I think people miss a lot in Painter is this Papers palette. Now this is really one of the more powerful tools in Painter. It's not really a tool, I guess, it's more of like a feature. But what it does is it allows you to pick a texture, which essentially becomes your painting texture, the surface of your painting, and that propagates through almost all of the brushes that you have selected, or that you can select. So what it'll do is it'll actually blend whatever texture you have selected into your painting when you're blending. So you're not actually losing texture when you're blending, you're gaining texture, which is pretty cool. So you can reset the scale of your paper so that it will actually blend into your drawing, and you can really get a lot of texture diversity that way, and it prevents your painting from becoming too flat or too static. That's something that drives me nuts with digital artwork, is that a lot of times it can look so plastic, and this can really help fight against that and make your digital paintings have a little bit more of that traditional feel to them. You can see as I change the intensity of the paper, the texture comes through a little bit more. And if you're using a brush like Digital Water, as you build it up and dry several layers, you can really see the texture start to come through, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's pretty neat. So yeah, if you haven't experimented with that papers palette, I would encourage you to do so, because it's really powerful. You can really add a lot of traditional feel to your paintings and kind of help you get rid of some of the digitalness of your digital paintings. So you can see if I add a little shadow under here, under this guy, and I want to blend it in with that soft grainy water blender, it can really soften some areas out, but it won't get rid of the texture. The texture will actually come through as I use that brush, which is pretty cool. So it doesn't just become like a plastic surface, it actually has some grit to it, like a charcoal paper or some kind of watercolor paper. And I love it when digital artwork has that kind of traditional feel to it. It can be really cool. Just add a really cool effect. The next brush I use a lot is called the wet acrylic brush. Now this brush is super soft. It has like a little bit of a streakiness to it, a little bit of a nebulous quality. So if you're just blocking something in, it can be a really cool way to be very non-committal, be kind of vague about your line choice or what you want to draw. It can be very kind of freeing to not really think about anything too specifically, just think about big rhythms, big brush strokes, and then later you can come in with a harder edge brush and then do your details on top of it, which is cool. So I'll use that brush, not a ton, but I will use it oftentimes if I'm trying to figure out an idea or come up with something that is maybe not super clear in my mind before I start. So that's a pretty cool one. The other cool thing about that brush, I use it more for painting than I do for drawing, but it will actually move paint that's on the surface dynamically. So if I have a bright blue stroke and I pull it through my line art, you can see how it displaced the line art. It will actually displace whatever you have on the canvas and mix with it dynamically. That can be really cool when you're doing something that's moving or you want to have a sense of motion to it. If you want to paint with some rhythm or paint with some force, that can be really cool for that kind of thing. It can also be really cool if you want to try to eliminate some of your line art. It'll allow you to kind of blow through some of that line art and make the tone more dominant, which can be really cool. So that's an interesting dynamic feature of that brush. One of my favorite brushes is the next one I'm going to show. It's called Digital Water. My professor at Cal State Fullerton, Cliff Cramp, showed me this brush, and he was obsessed with it at the time, and since he showed it to me, I have become obsessed with it now. It is amazing. I use it mostly for painting, but I've also come to use it a lot for drawing, as far as laying in tone or just some basic shadow goes. It can be very subtle, it'll lay on top of your line art until you dry it. So it's like a completely dynamic layer that sits on top of whatever is underneath it until you actually dry it, which allows for a lot of really interesting possibilities. I like to use it somewhat similar to traditional watercolor, where I build it up in layers, but it's kind of a little bit like doing it in fast forward, because you can dry whenever you want, like on the fly. So I've actually set up a hotkey to dry my digital water. I set it up on F5, so I'll go ahead and hit F5. So that layer is now dry. Now I can go in again and put another layer down. So as I layer this up, you can see it becomes a little bit darker. And if I dry again, it becomes a little bit darker. And if I dry again, it becomes a little bit darker. So as I kind of do that, it kind of gives a sense of, I guess in 3D we would call it ambient occlusion. Any normal painter would just call it soft light, but in 3D we like to make things sound extra technical and fancy, so I'll go ahead and say ambient occlusion. But this brush can be really useful for that kind of stuff. Laying down some tone on top of a drawing, adding a little bit more volume to the forms you've already laid down. Really cool. It's like a very subtle way to amplify the finish of a piece. And it's also a really good way to lay down color, which we'll cover later on in the next video, where you can actually mix colors together, just like traditional watercolor, to get some really vibrant, dynamic color relationships going on, which is pretty cool. So you can kind of see how that's working. You know, this is a quick demonstration to show how that works, but it can be, once you kind of get this down, you can make it really fast as a way to just kind of shade, like put a very minimal amount of shading on a drawing and kind of get it to read really well, really quickly. Yeah, so that's the digital water brush, and I'll be going over more of that in the next video, but it's a really cool brush, very, very versatile with lots of different opportunities. You can use it very subtly to kind of blend it like that, or you can use it really hard to make it stick a little bit more. And then I've also made a variant of that brush that is just water that will blend out and kind of diffuse whatever watercolor I've laid down. So that is a really cool way to add a little bit more life to a drawing. If you wanted to take it a little, like one step further than just the line art, digital water is a really good way to go. Yeah, so that's a cool one.